What is breathing in the walls? Mara didn't believe in haunted buildings, only in cheap landlords and bad wiring. She told herself that again the night she moved into apartment 3B on Wren Street, a crooked Victorian chopped into thin slices of life, the kind of place where the hallway carpets never lay flat and every stair knew your weight. It was late November. A dry wind dragged at the eaves, and the radiators coughed like old men. Mara set her single box on the kitchen counter, opened the cracked window for air, and listened to the building settle around her. Pipes clinked, the refrigerator hummed. Somewhere upstairs, a chair scraped. Normal sounds. She was grateful for normal. She'd taken the place because it was cheap and close to work, and, though she'd never say it out loud, because no one from her old life knew where it was. Fresh start, she told herself. New town, new job, blank page. At 2:17 a.m., something exhaled behind the kitchen wall. The sound wasn't the normal sigh of a heater or the rush of a pipe. It was distinctly human, slow, laden, the breath of a sleeping person just on the other side of the plaster. Mara froze, one hand on the sink, and held her own breath to listen. The wind gusted. The window rattled. Silence. She laughed once without humor. Old house, she said to the empty kitchen. Old houses breathe. At 2:19 a.m., the wall inhaled. She slept with the lights on and woke to weak winter sun and the smell of someone else's cooking in the hallway. The day made her bold. She knocked on her neighbor's door, apartment 3A, and a pale woman with linen-thin hair opened, a wool shawl wrapped tight. "Hi, I'm Mara. Just moved in. Did you hear anything last night?" The woman's mouth softened. "You heard it at 2 in the morning." Not a question. "I thought it was the pipes, but it sounded like breathing." The neighbor nodded, stepping back so Mara wouldn't see the crucifix nailed above the coat hooks. "The walls carry old buildings. I'm Mrs. Doyle." She hesitated. "If you hear humming, don't hum back." Mara tried to laugh. "Okay." "Not even to be polite," Mrs. Doyle said, and closed the door gently, as if keeping something from waking. The first week passed in a new job blur, setting passwords, learning faces, pretending she belonged in an office with glass partitions and Tuesday donuts. Nights were harder. The breathing returned, always around 2:17, a slow wash behind plaster. Sometimes it came from the kitchen. Other nights, it nestled behind the headboard or the closet. Once, half asleep, she reached out and laid her palm on the wall. The plaster was cold as a river stone. Thursday evening, she met the super in the stairwell. Mr. Finch, short and barrel-chested, the kind of man who spoke through his nose. He smelled faintly of bleach. "How's 3B treating you?" he asked, jangling a ring of keys. "Fine. The heat's a little temperamental, and there's a sound at night." She smiled, aiming for casual, like someone breathing in the walls. Mr. Finch's smile hardened. "Probably raccoons in the crawl. Happens. I'll set a trap. These are interior walls. Sound carries," he said, exactly like Mrs. Doyle, and moved on. That night, Mara made tea and left the television murmuring to drown out the building. Around midnight, a knock came at her door, soft and hurried. She flinched and peered through the peephole. A blur, a dark shape. In the end, it was a kid of maybe 14, hair shoved under a knitted cap, eyes puffed from crying. "Do you have tape?" he asked when she cracked the door. My window won't stop whistling." She found a roll in her box, clear packing tape, and handed it over. "You live?" 2C. He sniffed. "Our mom's at work. The walls are loud tonight." "Tell me about it," she said before she could stop herself. The boy's gaze darted beyond her shoulder toward the kitchen. "Don't open it," he whispered. "Open what?" But he had already turned away, the tape clutched like a lifeline. On Saturday afternoon, Mara decided to prove something to herself. She took photos of the apartment, corners, vents, baseboards, zooming in on cracks and hairline seams. She pressed her ear to different spots and recorded what she heard. When she played the recordings back, tinny and too loud, there it was. A long inhale, a pause, a longer exhale. No rattling, no whoosh. Flesh, not metal. At dusk, she went down to the basement under the pretense of laundry. A single bulb swung on a chain, revealing the slow heart of the building. The furnace crouched like a sullen animal, ducts wrapped in silver tape, walls of blotched stone. She discovered a door she hadn't noticed before, painted the same dull gray as the wall, with a metal hasp bolted across it. Someone had screwed the hasp shut so many times that the wood around it was chewed. She bent and pressed her ear to the seam. Cold seeped into her skin. For a moment, nothing. Then, so close it seemed to be inside her own head, there came a hum. It was tuneless, low, the aimless sound a person makes when they don't know they're making sound. "Oh, oh, ah." A long breath became a melody and then collapsed again. She jerked back and smacked her head on the swinging bulb. By the time Mr. Finch's footsteps thumped on the stairs, she was upright, chin high. "Laundry," she said. "You dropped something?" His eyes flicked to the bolted door and away again. "That room's supply, nothing to see." "What's inside?" "Old junk, pipes. Don't worry about it." He leaned to check the hasp, as if to reassure himself. "You need anything, leave a note. Office hours are posted." "Do the walls hum for you, Mr. Finch?" He looked at her then, really looked, and his mouth softened with something like pity. "Tenants hear all kinds of things, miss. They bring their own, too." He tapped his temple. "I suggest a white noise machine." Mara lasted another week on tea and noise and denial. At work, she stared at spreadsheets while the columns slid into lines like counting marks on plaster. At night, the breathing drew closer. 2 nights, it seemed to come from inside the closet, and she dragged a chair against it just to be sure. On the 3rd, she woke to a sound like someone running their finger along the underside of her mattress. She turned on every light and sat on the kitchen floor, back to the sink, knife in hand. When 2:17 came, the exhale was so close it stirred the hair along her jaw. "Who are you?" she whispered. Silence. Then, not words exactly, but a pressure, a weight in the wall that felt like a tension. She did not sleep. In the morning, she knocked on Mrs. Doyle's door, and the old woman let her in without a word, as if she'd been expecting it. Her apartment smelled of lavender and dust. A kettle sang. The crucifix on the wall was joined by an old photograph of the building when its paint was new. "What lives in these walls?" Mara asked. "Please don't say sound carries." Mrs. Doyle poured tea. "Something got into this building a long time ago. I don't know what to call it. I call it not alone." "Is it a person?" "I think it was." Once she wrapped her hands around the cup, knuckles the shape of dryer stones. "There was a man before your time, lived in 3B with his wife. They shouted a lot. Then she went quiet. Then he went quiet. Mr. Finch found their door open one morning. No one inside. After that, if you listen at night, the walls breathe. Sometimes they hum. It likes a response." "Likes?" Mrs. Doyle's eyes were water clear. "Buildings remember what we feed them. Grief, fear, names. This one learned how to ask for more. Mara folded her arms tight around herself. So you ignore it. You do not answer. You do not hum back. Mrs. Doyle set her cup down. If the humming changes to a whisper, you leave. Mara lasted 3 more nights. On the first, the hum braided itself with her name, not quite spoken, more like the memory of a sound held in the jaw. Ra. On the second, something tapped under the kitchen sink, a patient exploratory sound, as if counting the screws that held the cabinet to the wall. On the third, she dreamed she was lying inside the wall itself, plaster pressing her ribs, dust thick in her mouth, and when she woke, there was grit between her teeth. She couldn't live like this. She left a note for Mr. Finch. Noise in 3B is unbearable. Please check ventilation, and took the afternoon off work. She bought a crowbar at the hardware store on the corner because the man behind the counter didn't ask why. Back home, she turned off the heat and the lights and waited. At 2:15, the building hushed, as if holding its own breath. Okay, Mara said into the quiet. I hear you. The walls didn't answer. They didn't have to. The air thickened, as if it had to push around a body to reach her. She went to the baseboard under the kitchen window, where the plaster met a strip of wood so old it had dried to hairline cracks. She tapped until she found the hollow. There, a pocket of space. She wedged the crowbar in and pried. The baseboard shrieked free. Behind it, in the 2 inches between wall and lath, something gleamed. A strip of cassette tape. She pulled. More came. Yards of it, knotted and looped, spooling like intestine, brittle in her hands. It had been fed through a thin slit, cut into the plaster, and then stuffed back. At the end was a small recorder, the kind with red buttons and a plastic mouth. It was on. Her skin crawled. She didn't press stop. She pressed play. The machine clicked. White noise filled the kitchen. The soft sea sound of tape, a faint hiss. Under it, her own breathing. Under that, another breath. She turned the volume up. The other breath was steady, not the pulse of a machine or the sway of a tree. Sometimes it paused. Sometimes it hitched, as if listening. Something moved behind her. She spun. The kitchen was empty. The window showed only the black gloss of night. She could hear Mr. Finch's boots in the hall, slow and careful, as if testing each board. The recorder hissed. Mara, the wall said, not from the speaker, but from the seam itself, and she flung the crowbar at it. The sound the bar made when it struck was shockingly alive, like hitting with a bone. The hallway lock turned. Her door opened a hand's width and stopped. Mr. Finch's voice drifted in. You called, miss? Thought I heard. The breath in the wall drew in, slow as a tide. Don't come in, Mara said, but she didn't hear her own voice over the sound that came next. From the baseboard space, small and dry, the rustle of something dragging itself forward. She grabbed the recorder, and the tape twisted around her wrist like string around a kite. In the hall, Mr. Finch's key scraped. The chain she'd set pulled taut. He swore softly. Open up. Mara backed toward the sink. The room's edges had softened, as if they'd been fingered under running water. The seam where the baseboard had been seemed deeper, a dark line that widened as she watched. Breath washed over her face, damp and oddly sweet, like lilies left too long in a vase. The chain on the door snapped. Mr. Finch shouldered in. He stopped when he saw her and the hole. His eyes widened behind his lenses. Don't, she said, and didn't know if she meant don't come closer or don't look directly at it, the way you don't look straight at an eclipse. He took one step, then another, his keys ringing faintly. "This has happened before," he said, so quietly she might have dreamed it. "Sometimes it wants to talk. Sometimes it wants to be let out." "What is it?" He shook his head. "It starts as a sound. It ends as a room." The seam widened with a sound like paper tearing. A shape pressed through, only the impression of a face at first, as if something on the other side were pushing at damp wallpaper. Then fingers, long and wrong, slid into the kitchen light. Plaster dust fell in soft drifts. The tape recorder whined as if its batteries were dying. Mr. Finch did something then that Mara would remember, uselessly, for a long time. He set down his keys. He put his palm flat on the wall beside the widening gap and spoke not to her, but to it. "You can't stay," he said, and there was a terrible tenderness in his voice. "You took a husband and a wife. You took the boy from 2C's father. You cannot take again." The fingers paused. The breath hitched, almost a sob. For a heartbeat, the kitchen was only dust and two humans and an old machine whispering someone else's lungs. Then the hand pushed farther through, reaching. Mr. Finch grabbed the crowbar and swung. Plaster exploded, the kitchen filled with a dry, choking storm. The fingers vanished, the seam gaped, and then seemed to heal, closing to the thin lip of a crack. The recorder kept hissing. Mara stood with her back to the sink, shaking so hard her teeth clicked. Mr. Finch leaned over, hands on knees, coughing. "You should go," he said after a long time. "Tonight. Will it follow?" He considered. "It doesn't have to. It's in the building. It learns you. It learns your name. Why didn't you tell me?" He straightened, white with plaster dust. "People don't believe, or they do, and they feed it. Walls like this." He stopped, as if he'd overstepped some private rule. "There are other places to live." Mara packed before dawn. She didn't look at the baseboard as she passed. In the hallway, Mrs. Doyle's door was open a sliver, and the old woman's eye glinted there like a bead. "Do not hum back," she whispered, and shut herself away. Mara left her keys on the super's desk with a note that said, "I'm sorry." She drove until the town thinned to fields, until morning was a pale seam on the horizon. She forced herself not to look in the rearview mirror, because she knew if she did, she would see the building riding in the distance like a ship, all its windows unblinking. A week later, in a quiet sublet with clean drywall and a view of parking lot trees, a package arrived with no return address. Inside, a cassette labeled WREN. On its side, a strip of tape had been peeled and stuck back too many times. Mara set it on the counter and stared until dusk. She shouldn't. She wanted to. At 2:17 in the morning, she pressed play. Nothing. Hiss. The refrigerator's hum. Her own breath. She laughed, shaky with relief, and reached to turn it off. From far away, through 1,000 miles of tape, someone exhaled. Then, deliberate and patient, it learned how to say her name.